The method that we've dealt with on poverty and social exclusion in the EU, like so many other things in the past decade, has been the so-called open method of coordination and setting national action plans and trying to measure up against those. It has been a useful approach. It has focused attention, it has some strengths, it has significant weaknesses also. But the theme today, and for these 2 days, is multi-level governance. This in a way is not new, although we always find new ways to express old things. This is the politics of proximity. It is what Tip O'Neill, the former Speaker of the US House, said in his autobiography, all politics is local. And so the multi-level governance is about proximity. It's about not just in EU policy development and capacity, the Brussels-based institutions, or necessarily even or only the national capitals, but drilling down to local authorities and regional authorities. Again, a number to locate this field. In round terms, there are 90,000 local authorities in the EU 27. There are more than 300 regional authorities in the EU 27. Collectively, they account for 1/3 of EU public expenditure, and they account for 2/3 of EU public capital expenditure. Collectively, the 90,000 local authorities and the 300 regional authorities spend 16% of EU gross domestic product. To locate that for you, that is 16 times larger than the EU budget. And so as an instrument of public policy, connected to some shared best practices and common European vision, it is potentially a much more powerful instrument if connected than if disconnected, and much more powerful relative to the size of the EU budget. Our public authorities in public procurement, when they have to tender at an EU level, have advertised, according to Eurostat, the data is about a year and a half now old, I would say, they've advertised the equivalent of 3% of GDP in public procurement, 3 times the size of the EU budget. So the idea that multi-level governance is some kind of a novelty is clearly not new, because all politics is local and proximity matters. And indeed, anyone who would believe in federalism knows that it starts on the ground and not at the top. But it's a newer debate in our European thinking. It's a new way of looking at our European world, and a new set of actors that can be connected and mobilized, and whose energies, some way, can contribute more to the common public good, starting at the level of the neighbourhood, but connecting it to the level of the wider European community. It's also a vision that wants to engender a sense of a Europe that works from the bottom up and is constrained and limited if it's perceived as a Europe from the top down. And even to do with legitimacy in politics for European Union's future and for its evolution, this to me is indispensable. We have created Europe in some fashion. We are still struggling to find her Europeans. And this multi-level governance theme is at least one of the better routes. Because if you add up all the persons in local authorities, politically elected and mandated, and in regional government, and in national assemblies, you are looking at some tens of thousands of political actors. And even vast as its size is, the European Parliament is 750. So if you're making an outreach to a population of 500 million, no matter how heroic your vision, there are limits to what 750 can do in a political environment to do with a population base of 500 million. A word of caution. We're in Lisbon, and it's wonderful to be here, and it's a wonderful city to visit, and you're right to make the point that we're welcome, but right to make the point that it is such a pleasant place for visitors to be. But the Lisbon agenda, which was very high in its objectives and aspirations before the crisis changed a lot, produced patchy results. It was good, quite good in some areas, not so good in others, and not at all impressive in yet other areas. But I would say three general things about it, to draw a lesson about themes and Europe. One, I would say, it was stronger on the expression of policy objectives than it was on the identification of appropriate policy instruments. Europe needs to get better at instruments of policy, the levers, the muscle, the incentives to connect up to wider energies. Stating good policy objectives absent serious policy delivery instruments is storing up a potential failure or a suboptimal outcome. Secondly, we know this to be the case, Europe frequently is stronger on its regulatory self-expression than its budgetary self-expression because of the relatively limited size of its budget. In European movement, I think we should be pleading for a stronger budgetary self-expression of Europe. Because without that, without the ability to incentivize the multi-tiered governance of which we speak, we risk to have rhetoric in speeches, but lacking the instruments in practice to incentivize and motivate responses. And I think if we go that road, the gap between our aspirations and our delivery, which was a debate on the Lisbon agenda, risks, as Wim Kok said in a halfway report in 2005, to become a credibility gap for the European Union. And we don't need to start storing up with new ideas, like multi-level governance, old credibility gaps, by not getting the systems right. In the end, it's on the ground that communities know best what their challenges are. And in the end, it is their agility and capacity to respond that will make the difference in people's day-to-day lives. And in the end, if we get the local correct, we can deal with the global more easily. So the multi-level governance hypothesis and challenge is an interesting new dimension. Some fantastic work, and some of the data I've given you is drawn from work done by the Committee of Regions. And there really is a possibility here. But my strong hope in closing out my remark to introduce this seminar is that in dealing with multi-level governance, including and in particular to do with poverty and social exclusion, but not only, I hope that it will be richer in a few years' time than rhetoric in elite speeches, that it will be evident through muscular instruments and backed by decent budgetary capacity. If it's not, it risks to create, for our collective European enterprise, a shortfall that in the end reduces its legitimacy. Europe needs her Europeans. Thomas Jefferson remarked when they were working in Philadelphia all those centuries back on the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, that for government to work properly, it needs the consent of the governed. If we look at turnouts and secular trends in European Parliament elections, that consent is proving harder to earn in contemporary circumstances. And delivery is one of the ways, I think, to reverse it. So I hope you have an excellent seminar. I thank our host city, and our host colleagues from European Movement, and thank in advance our other partners from Segurança Social and the Instituto de Segurança Social, and our speakers for your participation, and you for your participation also. We've earned our coffee break and we will resume in 15 minutes' time, if I may, to get us slightly back on time. Thank you very much.